Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofits, where the nerdy passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact is celebrated. Together with your host, Jarrett Ransom, the inspiring stories and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders will be explored. Join us to unravel the mysteries of successful fundraising, uncover the secrets to effective advocacy, and nerd out over innovative approaches to solving social challenges. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense discussions with real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and discover or rediscover how to change the world together. Now let's dive in and embrace the power of our nerdy side.
I'm really excited for this guest, David Macek, and I think he is fantastic. He is with an organization that their mission is also around wellness, well-being, mindfulness, mental health, and it's called Inward Bound Mindfulness. So David Macek shares a lot about his own contemplative practice. He shares about how he uses mindfulness in his life. I want to say very fascinating because he has been living and practicing, a wellness practice for himself for quite some time. So I hope you enjoy hearing from David. I know I did, and I shared I could talk to him for hours. So go ahead and sit down, get cozy, pour yourself a nice glass of hot tea or whatever it is that nourishes you, and listen to what David has to share. Also, shout out of gratitude to Bloomerang. Again, season 1 sponsor, grateful to you. Super grateful to have your support in these conversations. Thanks, Bloomerang. Well, David, I am thrilled to have you with me for this conversation. It's really important to me that we get different perspectives and voices into this conversation. And I have to just tell you, I picked you. I think you're awesome. First of all, I love the mission of the organization where you work, and I value the male voice. So welcome and thank you for saying yes to being in this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah. And already you have such a calm tone voice. I love it. Is that your normal? Like, do you just stay calm and collected and poised 24/7?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. No. But yeah, I think I have practices that help me ground, when I feel like I need a moment or I'm starting to get stressed or something like that. So that's what I say I'm most grateful for, is having that ability to come back,
Having these tools. Well, let's jump into that because I would love for you to share with our listeners about the organization where you work, kind of what you do, because you're at Inward Bound Mindfulness. And so when you mention, I have tools, I have resources, like you work in this space. So would you share with us a little bit? I like to ask the question, like, what are the names you go by? What are the hats you wear? But I also want you to really lean into, David, like the mission that you serve.
Sure. Yeah. So Inward Bound Mindfulness is a nonprofit organization that primarily serves teenagers, 15 to 19 years old, by way of a kind of an alternative summer camp that's grounded in mindfulness and contemplative practice. There's a huge thread that goes through there too around personal identity and being celebrated for who you are. Yeah, I've been working with Inward Bound Mindfulness for now 4 years, and it really tracks with my personal practice and my professional work, which I've kind of been in the realm of nonprofit and contemplative practice and environmental work basically my whole career.
Yeah. I feel like mindfulness has become more and more mainstream. And I'm curious, what is your definition of mindfulness?
Yeah, a simple definition is just being able to be present with what's here. Being aware of what am I feeling, in body sensations, what am I thinking, what are my emotions, and then there's interpersonal mindfulness. What is all those things going on for you too? And can I perceive clearly around what's going on for me and what's going on for another? Because I think we're in this hyperactive world with a lot of stimulus going on. And I certainly know myself, and I imagine for others too, there's plenty of times where things are going on, you're not even aware of it, you know?
Yeah,
So
100%. What about you use the word contemplative practice? That's not something I hear often. Share with us what that means.
yeah, so for contemplative practice, I would say that's more of a formalized practice of mindfulness. So, I would say most listeners are probably aware of a meditation practice, where you're in some sort of seated position, or it could be walking, but there's actually kind of a formal process and a formal uh, goal of it. It might be you're following your breath, or you might be focusing attention on something else. But I would include yoga, I would include Tai Chi, any of the movement arts too, as under that umbrella of contemplative practice.
Yeah. How did you get into this? Like how did you, because again, like when I was growing up, raised, have a brother, have a very active career focused dad. He's retired now. I didn't see this really modeled by men in my life. So if I may just call that out, right? Like what attracted you to this space? How did you find your way here?
Yeah. Well, I don't, I think even as a little kid, I had a curiosity about this. I used to find time where I would just go in my room and like lay on my floor and say, what is this world? Who am I? Um, and so that wasn't, I still remember that, but it wasn't like that was a thread that carried through my, teenage years and everything. But I would say, I grew up as part of a Catholic church, and I used to find time in my teenage years to I like to go to church by myself and just sit in like the back row. And so there was like some part of like reflection and quiet that I felt kind of pulled to. But it was really in my 20s where I had moved, I was out in the world, um, and got connected to yoga, and did some different traveling and visited, yeah, just a number of different
Yeah.
centers or places where a whole bunch of, contemplative practice is happening. Um, and so, yeah, I've kind of been on that journey for 20 years now, or something like
Yeah.
that. I
That's
used to
super.
teach yoga. I like to say I'm a retired yoga teacher. So, yeah,
I like that. Is there a pose for that for the retired yoga teachers? There's got to be
I
something
think it's
going
just
on.
shavasana, sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite pose. That's my
Yeah.
favorite.
Oh, yeah.
So let's backtrack, David. Like, what are all the names you go by? What are all the titles you hold? What are all the balls you're juggling? What does your world look like, kind of, in the workspace, in the personal space, to your comfort, you're willing to share? We would love to hear.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go personal space first. So, I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I have a 6-year-old daughter. Um, I am right now with our house. We got some kind of semi-urgent work going on, so I'm kind of a general contractor of, bringing people through. So yeah, all the things that go with being part of a family, and um, taking care of a house and a home, and all those things. Um, yeah, I'm a golfer. We talked about that a little bit at the start, so like we'll talk about that maybe later for some fun. And then at work, I've always in the nonprofit realm, I've been this kind of general leader that kind of has my hands in everything. I've been an executive director before, right now, which we've spoke at another podcast around our model as a collaborative leadership team. So we don't have an executive director. So I still find myself in all different parts of the organization, but primarily I fundraise. I do a lot around business strategy and organizational strategy, um, and do some stuff around like business development for our custom programs. But
It,
I used to moonlight as a web designer, so I like do stuff on our website too. And it's like, it's the classic small to mid-sized nonprofit, like grit that's required, and it is the ultimate like many hats wearing place,
Right.
to be.
It absolutely. And your team is distributed, is that right? Like 100% remote, even in different parts of the country?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm here in Ohio, but I have, colleagues all across the country. I think we span all four time zones. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot, and you're not new to wearing the multiple hats. I'm always like, well, which hat do I have on now? Or how many hats do I have on now?
Right.
Um, what do you do when the hats seem too heavy, right? Or the balls seem too much, and you just see a crack that you're going to drop a ball, we're going to drop a plate, like all these, analogies we refer to often. What do you do? Like, and I'm really curious from you, David, because I feel like you have had such a strong practice in mindfulness. How do you recognize these signs? And if you would be willing to share with our listeners, like, how can we start to recognize our own signs even earlier?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's step one is like recognition and acknowledgement. Like you can't go to any other steps unless that happens. And, I think there's some real obvious um, things that pop up where, the stress, and then and if it's that obvious, it's probably you've caught it a little too late, So some of
Yeah.
the early sides of things, it might be something going on in my body, where it's like, some neck or back pain that's just starting to creep up, or I'm like scrunching my toes or something, and it's a meeting. It's like, wait, maybe,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
yeah, your
my jaw.
jaw, yeah, all different things. A lot of people have the middle of their forehead sort of scrunching.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think any place where there's like a contraction, because there is like I think contraction's different. We talked about setting boundaries. There's a fundamental openness that I try to have with the world, and I think boundaries come with openness. But I think this like contraction is a little different than setting a boundary. Contraction is kind of a reactive to like some kind of stress that's going on, whereas boundary setting might be a proactive stance. So I think tracking that as it might come up in my body, in my thinking, emotions, and then yeah, I think after that recognition is just having the discipline to say, I need to carve out time, and that could be as easy like a reset. I work from home, so and we're lucky to have some woods in our backyard. It might be just a 15-minute walk to the where 100 yards into the woods and then come back, but then there's bigger things you got to do when that doesn't solve everything, and I think of contemplative practice. If you're following contemplative or spiritual path, there's the question of like, what are you doing as a daily practice? What are you doing as like, and that's most likely just an individual daily practice, weekly, monthly. What are you doing to get together with others to do some practice together? And then when you get kind of longer frequencies in that, like, a quarter or once a year, are you carving time out for personal retreat? And that's where I think, the kind of baseline is where in some sort of retreat, you get to move that baseline up a little bit. And I feel like in my life, if I haven't taken time for that, then that baseline might move down as well. But the daily and weekly practices are just trying to sustain a quality of well-being. But I think, there is opportunity to go into a deeper state of well-being in our lives too.
Yeah, always a deeper state, right? And it's I say a practice, you get to a level and then you could get to another level. And with continued practice, then you can go deeper. I would love to ask, because when you shared, kind of all the names, your husband, your father, you're really good I'm hearing you're really good at finding, like if I have a contraction, whether it's in my, my forehead, my shoulders, my back, like I'm physically feeling something. So it sounds like you're really good at spotting this out for yourself. But I have to ask, do you have anyone in your life or multiple people that will check you on your own stress level, right? And they'll say, hey, David,
Yeah.
I think you might need to take a breath. I
Yeah.
think you might need to take a
Sure.
walk in the woods. Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so definitely my wife and I she's in a similar realm of, tending to personal well-being and mindfulness. So we definitely play that role for each other, and sometimes more skillfully than other times, as maybe folks know in any kind of partnership. There's all that happens. So yeah, I would say primarily my wife, my daughter, in not the most explicit ways, but I can, based on just how we're relating to each other, if I'm, in a space that's not as open as I'd like to be. And then I would say on our at Inward Bound, on our staff team, because of the nature of our work and I think the nature of our organizational structure, feedback, checking in, like real checking in is a very common practice. So I think that's a helpful way where it's not so much someone telling me like, hey, you seem pretty stressed, but just having a a person that can just ask that question, like, how are you doing? Or what's alive for you? Or that might be happening in a small team meeting or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you for sharing. And that's the culture of your team. I'm curious, there's so many individuals in our space and our sector. They don't have that culture, right? Like how might we invite that culture, build that culture, cultivate that culture? Because anytime I'm going to say normal society and speak from my experience, someone says, "Oh, hey, how are you?" They're really not looking for
yeah,
that deep
totally.
check-in, right? "Oh, I'm good. Thanks. See you later." So like, how do you invite that into your space?
Yeah. Well, I think before you institute a practice like that, where it's like, oh, we're going to take time to do this, the quality of what you're wanting to do is dependent on the safety and trust that exists within the culture. So if you don't have a culture of safety, respect, trust, all those things that we know are like foundations of healthy relationships, if you don't have that, layering in like just a practice is not going to get you to I think to get, you might uncover a little bit, but it's still going to be constrained by that existing kind of nature. So I think if there is a wondering around, oh, could there be, some ways that our organization could support more well-being individually and collectively. Um, Maybe it's first checking out where well-being is not present right now, and some of that can be real, can be like a healthy tension with what it means to get your work done and what are the systemic practices in terms of workflows and things like that might also. So what do you do when what you're seeking in one way is also, starting to threaten or something, some other objectives that you have?
Yeah. I notice for me, and I'm going back to some of the signs that like show up for me in my body. I refer to my chest when I'm feeling anxiety, stress, like just high level of overwhelm. It becomes a pinball machine. And there's a ball, maybe multiple, that's just like ding, 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 like going all the way through my upper like chest cavity. I
Mhm.
feel that. And yesterday I felt it. I was going to a donor meeting and well, first of all, I had to drop my son back off for track practice, so a lot of hats is wear as well. Um, so he was in the car. I was pulling out of the driveway. I had it in reverse. I put it back into park. And I was like, I'm sorry, I need to take a breath. And in fact, I called it a shark fin because when he was little, David, we taught him shark fin, which for those of you listening, it's essentially like a karate chop hand, but you put your thumb, at the center of your forehead. You breathe in as your hand goes down to the center of your chest, right? And it kind of just stops right in there. For women, it kind of sits like just right above your breast. But looking at that, like, that was just an opportunity for me to breathe. And because we taught him shark fin when he was little, and now he's 13 and he's like, I don't want to call it shark fin, of course, but I needed that. I put it in park. I knew it was going to take an extra 60 seconds, but I needed that because I was behind the wheel, right? And I was pinball machining in my chest and I just needed to take a pause.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to share that with our listeners too, because I feel like it's relevant and very open to how it shows up for me. And that's my definition, but it's different for everyone. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think what you're pointing at is, I think of many of these donor meetings and big proposals that you might have,
Yeah.
and if it's like a few minutes prior to it, you know, if you haven't done any preparation, well, maybe you should take that time before to do it. But if you've done enough preparation, the best thing probably before you have, that experience is to find some sort of grounding exercise and so forth to feel a sense of calm to go into that. So I do that often where it's like, oh, I got to prep for this, prep for that. And it's like, actually, the best thing I could do for these next 3 minutes before the call is actually just breathe a little bit.
I love that. Yeah. And I feel it right now as you just say that, right? Like just take some breaths. What are some other resources you go to? I love where we're going in this conversation, David,
Sure.
especially when it comes to like these tools and techniques that we as busy nonprofit professionals, whether we, hold that fundraising title or a different, role in the organization, we are very, I'm gonna say like many of us are managing a lot of deadlines at the same time, a lot of tasks, a lot of project, like there's a lot on everyone's plate. What are some other tools that you go to? Because I love that you said the best thing I can do right now is to breathe.
Yeah.
Do you focus?
Um, yeah, I think, I mean, my mind goes more to, um, like personal kind of practice. So like, for example, one thing that we've had, my wife and I, since we were ever dating or anything, was no technology in the bedroom. So, to have a space that, is a place to sleep, is a place to read, maybe it's a place to, do some yoga or different things like that. So massage gun, but I think a lot of what I hear from, when I see from other people is like there's no disconnect between all the things. And I think the phone primarily is like our line to everything. We have our emails on our phone. We have any, buy stuff on our phone, whatever you want. Yeah, it's right here. So that I think that's kind of a simple thing. I mean, maybe it's not so easy if that's not a existing practice, but that's been nice to be like at the end of the day, when I enter my bedroom, I know I'm there to rest, and and what I do before I go to sleep, it's all about tending to myself. So yeah, I would say that's one like little tip. Um, but all the other things, it's like turns out all these things we've heard for our whole lives, like eating well, getting some movement, those types of things really do work. And I noticed in myself, especially with eating too, when I have a fairly clean diet and really focus on that, it's like it's amazing the regenerative kind of energy that I have with it. So yeah, those are some ideas that come to
Great
mind.
tips. Yeah. I can't believe our time is going
Oh,
by so quickly. I have to ask this question because you mentioned, taking some time for retreats, taking time for self-care, taking times for this. I've been asking a lot of other guests too, like, when was your last vacation? But I'm going to ask this, when was your last retreat, David?
Yeah. So my last retreat would have been last summer
Okay.
in July, and I'll be going back this summer on retreat as well. And then by retreat, I would say something that's more a week or longer. So that was a 2 week long retreat. But I certainly try to make room throughout the year for kind of a weekend, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday thing here or there. But yeah, it's an appropriate edit to the question because the vacation would have been longer than that. I would consider the retreat, for me, that if I'm going to choose, like I'm going to choose a retreat over vacation because of what it gives back to me and what I'm looking for. But the last vacation would have been last spring. So,
And thank you for that delineation. I think that's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Final question for everyone listening. I would love for you to share, where can we find more about Inward Bound Mindfulness, especially if maybe, like myself, we also have teens and it's like, you know what, would like to share more with them about that. So where can we find more information about the organization where you serve?
Sure. So the primary resource would be the website. Right now it's ibme.com. But we're actually in a rebrand and launching a new website, which by the time someone hears this, it will be inwardboundmind.org. And we're on all the socials too. So you can just search for Inward Bound Mindfulness and you'll find us, especially on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you. I want to say just 100% appreciation, gratitude to you for being you and for elevating this mission of mindfulness with our youth, and you modeling this too. It means a lot. So thank you for bringing your voice to this conversation and bringing just so many opportunities or invitations to our listeners when it comes to tools, techniques, and resources, because it can be as simple as taking a breath, walking in the woods. So thank you, David. Lots of value with this.
Thank you so much.